All right, well, maybe you can guess one of the most commonly used psychological terms for 2022. And trust me when I say it's not going to be a surprise. It was gaslighting. So, gaslighting is a psychological term to describe psychological abuse where the perpetrator makes the victim question their own reality and even memories at times. Now, even though today's episode isn't on gaslighting, it's going to be on narcissistic tendencies or narcissism. And to differentiate that from a more severe diagnosis, which is narcissistic personality disorder. And my views on hopefully not even using that term anymore. All right, let's get started. All right, so doing a quick Google search for narcissist reveals an AI overview that claims that a narcissist is someone who has a personality style or disorder that is characterized by an excessive focus on oneself and lack of empathy for others. And of course, right under that has the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder and all the criteria that is conveyed within that diagnosis. All right, so I want to make this clear. I've been doing this type of business for well over 12 years, and only one case of narcissistic personality disorder has ever crossed my desk. With that said, with a second opinion, another clinician that kind of weighed out what was going on, we came to the conclusion that that individual did have that diagnosis. But let me make it clear that most people that are self-centered or what we call egocentric, they are not narcissists. And they most certainly do not have narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, so I, for one, personally don't like using Wikipedia, but I think it does a really nice and concise difference comparison between egocentrism and narcissism. All right, so let's read it real quick, all right? It's right down here. It's already highlighted. A person who is egocentric believes they are the center of attention, but does not necessarily find gratification in others' admiration. Both egotists and narcissists are people whose egos are greatly influenced by the approval of others, while for egocentrists, this may or may not be true. All right, so at the core of the difference between a narcissist and somebody that's egocentric is egocentrism to some degree is inherent in all of us, right? When we're comparing ourselves to the world when it comes to making judgments, right? Do I hang out with this person or don't I? We look within ourselves when it comes to our previous experiences and our own biases to make those decisions. And even in psychotherapy, when we talk about having successful relationships, we most frequently talk about how a person should first, A, take care of themselves first in order to take care of others in their immediate circle. All right, let's look in the corner here when it comes to the overall AI overview for narcissistic personality disorder. Some of the symptoms of NPD include an inability to handle criticism, a sense of entitlement, a preoccupation with fantasies or unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, a belief that they are special and unique, a tendency to exploit others, a tendency to form relationships with people who boost their self-esteem or status, and of course, frequent envy. So, of course, who I believe describes narcissistic personality disorder the best would be the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, text revision, by the American Psychiatric Association. In their book, a person that has narcissistic personality disorder has a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning early in adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. I'm just going to do a brief synopsis. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Has grandiose sense of self-importance, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, and ideal love, believes that he or she is special, requires excessive admiration, has a sense of entitlement, is interpersonally exploitative, lacks empathy, is often envious of others, or believes that other people are envious of them, and shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. So with that said, let's talk about some of the more likely characteristics of some of the lesser syndromes that probably would describe the person that you know that has at least some of these tendencies. All right, let's get started. All right, for the first example, imagine if you would A person that recently experienced a divorce, a separation, right? What happens in the minds of the two people that finally separate? We call those the lever and the left. There's always somebody that wants that divorce a little bit more, and somebody that still wanted to hold on, is a little upset or even hateful or spiteful associated with such an event. So typically with the left, or the individuals that were left behind, they usually want one or two outcomes if it's maladaptive when it comes to how they handle that situation. It's either to win or to get some type of psychological or emotional reaction from the other person. This typically explains why separated or divorced couples typically fight over custody, nights and weekends, who spends the most time with their child. So very frequently, a lot of these behaviors, these maladaptive behaviors, are a manifestation of the fact that they never wanted to leave that relationship and they were hurt and they want just satisfaction or retaliation for such an event. Another example when it comes to things that look like narcissistic behaviors, and that comes in the form of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, the overuse of pride to conceal toxic feelings of guilt and shame. So maybe this person grew up in a household that was impoverished for a great amount of time, and they always felt like they were never enough. Well, over time, they learned to compensate to that predisposition by simply realizing or falsely believing in their minds that they have to be smarter or better than the person that's next to them, that they always have to be right. We all know at least one person in our tight little circle that might be like that. I remember I've met people in the past that would sit on one of my couches or pieces of furniture and complain about how uncomfortable it is and that the couch would have to get replaced. And then after doing absolutely nothing, a week or two later, they'd come back to that location sitting on that couch and would say that that piece of furniture got replaced and that it's finally comfortable and that they're enjoying sitting on that piece of furniture. We call that inferiority versus superiority, right? Having to feel like you're always on top in order to be in that secure, safe place. So usually for a lot of people that have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, that's exactly what they're lacking, right? That sense of superiority, that they need it, that they can't feel like they're lacking or they're inferior or that there's something wrong with them, that, again, they have to come on the attack before, such a perceived threat person in the other room does it first. Because they've learned in the past that people can't be trusted, that I'm not enough. And so they have to compensate because of that. Now, when it comes to people that are watching this video that have called their loved ones a narcissist in the past, chances are you're not completely wrong. They at least fulfill some of that criteria or descriptive terms that describe who a narcissist is. But hear me out for a second. When it comes to calling that individual a narcissist, why do we use such a vulgar or really emotionally provoking term? Because oftentimes we want people to validate how we're feeling and to take us seriously. If we just say that somebody's being mean to us, people aren't really going to listen, or at least we perceive things that way, right? So of course we want to up the ante a little bit. We want to be validated. We most certainly want our suffering to be taken seriously, hence the term, a narcissist. I'm living with a narcissist. When it comes to other terms like being egocentric, that's a softer term that gets more to the point where, unlike a narcissist, someone that experiences egocentrism, they're just really focused on themselves. They don't necessarily need that validation from other people. Like, for instance, if I decide to, blow somebody off when it comes to wanting to hang out over the weekend because I don't want to, I'm focusing on myself, right? Those are my own selfish needs. Versus a narcissist, right, would be more at play at not caring about the consequences of their actions when it comes to other relationships. So even though me being selfish does affect other people in a negative capacity, a narcissist will take that to the nth degree usually, right? Or will be more harmful in that relationship. Maybe you can think of some examples of how that would play out. All right, so going one by one, right? So with a narcissist, typically, they lack general empathy or the inability to want to walk a mile in your shoes. That their needs are far more important than yours, and they could care less what your needs are. Inflated self-importance, right? Yes, some people are very grandiose. especially people that are more analytical. Typically, just because they're so smart, they oftentimes come across as being condescending, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're grandiose, right? That overuse of pride to conceal toxic feelings of guilt and shame. So if somebody has some type of other disability, let's say like autism spectrum disorder, chances are, because of the situation, social ostracism, and a few other factors that lead to trauma, they could have CPTSD, and which could exacerbate some of their traits that are associated with ASD, such as having watered down empathy, right? Or, being perceived as being grandiose or condescending. All right, sense of entitlement. I have seen in other scenarios or situations people with NPD that will literally fire their lawyers time and time again, truly believing that they can actually defend themselves, do a better job than a lawyer that's been to law school for 5 separate years and probably at least a decade's worth of professional experience. Right? Doesn't make much sense, but for them, right, they are the law when it comes to what is right and wrong. They don't need other people's advice or suggestions. And when it comes to interpersonal exploitative behavior, I mean, oh my God, that can manifest in so many different ways. Maybe that's setting up another person to fail, to feel better about themselves, right? I can see that playing out in so many different ways. For the need for excessive admiration, that kind of ties in with arrogance, right? Usually these people, not always, are power seeking. They very rarely work in professions that are helping other people or service to others, like in my profession, counseling, and typically have more power status jobs that usually revolve around themes of money, status, or some other type of dominating career. All right. Before we wrap up today's video, I want to talk about one of the concepts or parts associated with being in a narcissistic relationship that might resonate with some people out there. And that has to do with what Connecticut, or the state of Connecticut, calls coercive control, also what identified as coercive influence. So back in 2021, a law called Jennifer's Law was passed, also known as Substitute Senate Bill number 1091, Public Act number 2178, that goes over the concepts of coercive control. But before we go over that, I just want to give a little bit of credit to both Jennifers real quick. They were actually victims of domestic violence that passed away, a Jennifer Doulos and also a Jennifer Magnano. So with that said, we'll go over what the bill kind of conveys as being coercive control. All right, so we're going to go over coercive control, which includes, but is not limited to, unreasonably engaging in any of the following: isolating the family or household member from friends, relatives, or other sources of support. B, depriving the family or household member of basic necessities. C, controlling, regulating, or monitoring the family or household members' movements, communications, daily behavior, finances, economic resources, or access to services. D, compelling the family or household member by force, threat, or intimidation, including but not limited to threats based on actual or suspected immigration status. 2, engage to conduct from which such family or household member has a right to abstain, or 2, abstain from conduct that such family or household member has a right to pursue. E, committing or threatening to commit cruelty to animals that intimidates the family or household member, or F, force sex acts or threats of a sexual nature, including but not limited to threatened acts of sexual conduct, threats based on a person's sexuality, or threats to release sexual images. All right, well, after watching today's video, hopefully now you're able to differentiate and identify different levels of being self-centered. It's not always a biological predisposition, and very often it has to do with trauma or getting back at your spouse or former partner. But at the end of the day, a true narcissist, one that has narcissistic personality disorder, it's a diagnosis that's extremely rare. And even though the term narcissist is still applicable in a lot of these cases, I truly believe it shouldn't be used because it negates all hope for the future relationship. So if you're ready to leave that relationship, maybe it's better to demonize the person and call them a narcissist. But if you want it to work, I highly suggest one of those other terms. All right, until our next episode.